Welcome to another edition of the Game Changers podcast. I have with me today a special guest, Mr. Troy Francis. We had a wonderful podcast a few months ago, got a ton of questions for it, which teed up today's podcast, which is or 20 questions for Troy is what I'll call it, probably. Who knows, or part two to the other one. But Troy, before we hop in, tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do so they have a little bit of context before we hop in.
Sure. Yeah. So I've spent the last 16 years in government contracting, and I've done that across both the federal sector and the local government sector. I started my career with the Department of Defense at Military Sealift Command here at the Washington Navy Yard in DC. I was there for approximately 7.5 years, and then I switched gears and went to the Department of Health and Human Services from there. The agency I worked for there was called BARDA, or Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. And they were responsible for developing all the diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines, any type of medical countermeasures that help protect public health. And coincidentally, during that time I was there, the COVID pandemic hit. So we are one of the primary agencies responsible for responding to that. So that was a really, unique experience for sure. And then over the last 2 years, I switched gears and started working for the local government here in the city of DC. And I work for the District Department of Transportation. So right now we're in the process of trying to find ways to optimize our spending based off the new infrastructure bill that got passed recently under President Biden to rebuild a lot of our infrastructure here, roadways, bridges, tunnels, maintenance across the city, rehabilitating a lot of projects across the city. So it's been a well-rounded experience. I've been able to touch a lot of different types of projects and work with a lot of cool people. So that's my basic experience.
That's awesome. So from the COVID pandemic to the infrastructure pandemic, because like when you look at roads and bridges and different things, man, we sure do need a lot of improvements in a lot of cities. So yeah, that's got to be a lot of work there. So we're going to dive in and do the 20 questions here. And I will preface this by saying they won't necessarily all be connected. So if you're listening, we may jump around on topics a little bit. But we had posted on LinkedIn about this and just got a ton of, we probably had 50 questions, and I had to pare it down because we'd be on here all day long answering questions. So, but a lot of good questions. So why don't I start off with one that I was like, let me pick kind of a little bit of a hot one to start with. It's kind of a one that for me, I'm like, I can't stand it when I see this. So I'm curious about how you are. So what goes through your mind when you read a proposal response and it says, "Thank you for the opportunity to quote"? It starts off with such a generic, vanilla type of statement.
Yeah. So when it comes to any proposal that industry submits, I always a phrase I use is just stick to the script. The solicitation is telling you exactly what's being asked for, what the requirements are that we're seeking. It tells you exactly what the evaluation criteria are, how your proposal is going to be evaluated against it, how the different criteria are weighted, and just stick to that script. And for some companies, it might make sense to really just address line by line the requirements in the solicitation and just respond in your proposal on how you'd meet each of those individual requirements and just kind of go through it. And that way it shows that you're taking the time to really comb through it and make sure that you're, meeting it. Mm-hmm. If there's page limitations and maybe that's not a realistic way to approach it, then just look at the evaluation criteria, look at what's going to actually be considered, and then tailor the way that you structure your proposal against it. And just make sure, though, that you're meeting everything that's asked for in that solicitation, and definitely follow the instructions that are usually pretty clear. And if they're not, you always have the opportunity to ask that during the Q&A period to get some clarification on things and hopefully make it easier for you. But get rid of the marketing fluff. I can tell you right now, it's just not something it's just a waste of pages on your proposal. It's not something an evaluation panel is going to consider. It's not something the CEO is going to care about. Stick to the script, stick to what's being asked for and what's being evaluated against.
Yeah. And to me, that you nailed it right there. It's part of that marketing fluff is the thank you for the opportunity to quote. Everybody's thankful for the opportunity. We know that. We know you're happy that you're quoting it. Let's get to the meat of this thing, right? What is the best way to get you or a typical contracting officer? What is the best way to get you to respond to an email if you don't know me?
Usually a good way to do it is if a company is trying to understand who a program manager is in the agency that they should connect with, because they're the ones who have the budget to spend. And I think that's something that's misunderstood in industry, is like the contracting officer is the one who's really dictating how money's being spent and how procurements are being made. But the reality is the requirements are coming from program managers. The budget is coming from the program offices. They're our customer. We're strictly there to make sure that we're spending money in an optimal way, taxpayer money. We're following certain regulations and processes and procedures to make sure everything's fair and equitable, and increasing as much competition as we can. But if someone asks me like, hey, I'm interested in this program, who is the program manager that I need to connect with so that I can just explain to them what our capabilities are, have them understand like some of the technologies that we're developing, or, the capacity that we're able to perform for certain projects. And then at that point, I can just say, hey, program manager one, like, this person's really interested in connecting. I think it'd be worth your while, do some market research and just have like a brief call with them to discuss what they're capable of doing. And now that just lets the program manager know, all right, there's someone else out there who might be able to do this. They're going to go to your website. They're going to look at other projects you've been on. If you have other government contracts or subcontracts that you've been on, they'll probably be able to find them and just get a better sense of what you do. But to expect a CEO, a contracting officer, to do that, it's just not going to happen, because we're not the ones controlling the requirement. We're not the ones controlling the budget.
Yeah. Oh, great answer. Just something easy that you can just forward on and get it off
Yeah.
your checklist there. So
Yeah.
Here's another good one. So when an opportunity is up for recompete and you've got an incumbent who's been performing, say, satisfactory, they're not wowing anybody, but they're across the board doing a good job. Are
Yeah.
there a couple of factors that would lean towards bringing in or awarding to an alternate business versus the incumbent?
So it depends on how the recompete or the new solicitation is structured. I mean, if a competitor out there really and truly has a proposal that exceeds what the incumbent has proposed, and the evaluation criteria lends itself to rank that competitor higher, then ultimately the incumbent's not going to win. And that's just the way it's structured. I mean, I think what some folks call is like incumbent syndrome, where they feel as though they should just automatically get the next award. And the reality is there's some other company out there who wants it just as much, maybe more. And maybe you've gotten a little bit complacent. Maybe you haven't really changed the way that you've done your technical approach on this project. Maybe it's really just been like the bare minimum. You've met the like satisfactory standard. But the reality is the program managers aren't necessarily thrilled about it. And in the back of their mind, they're thinking, man, I hope there's someone else out there who can maybe help us out a little bit better, or do something a little bit differently here, or maybe like bring on different people that, could perform at a higher level. And, it just depends on how the solicitation's written and how the proposals are written. But there's never any favoritism given to incumbents. I mean, the evaluations are done with, as much bias taken out as possible. I mean, there's multiple members on a technical evaluation panel. In addition to that, there's a source selection authority, usually a contracting officer, who then double checks how the evaluations were done, make sure that the conversations that were being had were not biased in any way, make sure that the rationale and justification for selecting that winner, ultimate awardee, is done in a justifiable way and it's the right business decision. So there's definitely checks and balances along the way. But I would say to any incumbent out there, like, never, ever, ever expect that you're just guaranteed to get a follow-on contract, because you never know what's going on in the back of mind of like a program manager.
Yeah, great answer. I don't know if you've ever watched that show. I think it's called Last Man Standing with Tim Allen in it. They have the chain of stores that they have, and they're getting ready to build a new store. Guy comes in, and it happens to be Al from his older show. He comes in and like, hey, let's go to dinner and talk about the new build, and they're chit chatting and like, oh, sure, let's go to dinner and talk about the new build. And the boss is like, hey, why don't we take a look at, I don't remember the girl's name, but well, let's take a hard look at her proposal. And at the end of the day, they go with her. And he's like, hey, we didn't go with you. He's like, why? Because she's attractive and this and that and whatever. And he's like, no, she did a better job. They
Yep.
didn't assume anything. They really did their research and their homework, and we're gonna give them a shot. I know we
Yeah.
build 25 stores, but they're building our 26th.
Yeah.
And we see that, and people just get really complacent and all that stuff. So, talk about that a little bit more on something you said there about the evaluation team. That was one of the questions that
Sure.
people asked was, are contracting officers on the evaluation team? And the follow up is, are you reading the responses to these or just passing them along to the evaluation team?
I mean, we'll read every single proposal that comes in, because in addition to trying to understand what a company has proposed, we have to make sure that they followed all the instructions in the solicitation. Because if you miss out on one thing and you don't submit a document that we've asked for, it's very likely you'll be considered non-responsive or non-compliant, and you wouldn't be considered for award. So sometimes, like those unfortunate companies, we have to scrap at the very beginning and not actually evaluate them because they just didn't follow the instructions. But every proposal we'll look at, depending on the type of project, if it gets highly technical in nature, like for instance, when I was with BARDA, we had a lot of biomedical R&D projects, and on those evaluation panels are doctors and scientists and PhDs that work in that industry, toxicologists, things of that nature, and that's not my background.
Yeah.
So for me to really evaluate the technical merit of some technology or product that some biomedical companies developing, I'm not going to be the right person for that. So why wouldn't I rely on the expert advisors on the panel? But what we will do for any technical evaluation is we'll be there for all of the discussions that occur with the panel, because we want to make sure that not only are the conversations unbiased, but also is there any coercion occurring, which you don't typically think about that. But if there's a supervisor who's like a chair for an evaluation panel, and one of their direct reports is on that panel, they may not want to ruffle the feathers and go against it. So you have to encourage like discourse and discussion and make sure that they each individually and independently provide their rationale for why they want to rank a certain vendor a certain way. And so, like I said, there's checks and balances along the way. And then ultimately, once that's all completed and the recommended vendor for award is selected, it will go through a source selection authority. And that can be the contract officer, or it can be another person if the contract officer wants to appoint them, to then review the evaluation that occurred, the chairperson for the evaluation panel's recommendation, justification for why, look at how the evaluation was done, make sure that was done in a reasonable, justifiable way, an unbiased way. And they can always, at the last minute, provide some basis for why they don't agree with it. If they feel something was amiss, or maybe they didn't consider something in their evaluation, or maybe just they need to revise the evaluation in some way. So there's a lot of steps along the way to get to the ultimate decision, but everything's looked at. There's checks and balances for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. We're not far into this podcast, and I'm like, you're providing so much background process. I can see this is going to be really valuable for a lot of folks. So I really
Yeah,
appreciate you
yeah,
going
yeah.
into that detail, because a lot of people don't see the behind the scenes. They don't have an understanding, and it's very easy to get frustrated with the contracting officer or the team or anybody else because it's quiet and you guys are doing your job and you're working on things. And we'll
Yep.
get to some of those questions here in a minute. And again, people just don't know. So I think this helps them understand this is not as easy as going, well, we're going to flip through 5 proposals and pick one and move on. Like there's a
Right.
lot more to it. And I appreciate you, helping them understand that and draw that out there. So,
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
when it comes to like writing the RFPs, who's
Mhm.
typically doing that on your team?
So when it comes to like the technical meat and bones of it, again, we're going to let the subject matter experts and technical advisors really structure those parts of a solicitation. But when it comes down to making sure it's clear and concise, making sure that anyone in industry can truly follow it and be able to propose against it, and make sure the evaluation criteria are truly objective. so that when we have a technical evaluation panel, we can easily like map the criteria to the proposal, be able to rank them and score them in the most objective way possible. So like those are parts that we try to make sure are considered. And then also in some of the instructions for offers, it's if we just said, hey, submit a proposal that meets these requirements, it's very broad. So many times we'll ask for specific documents, some type of specific project plan laid out in a certain way, certain resumes done in a certain way, or, there's a million different things depending on the type of project. And so we'll make sure that what we're asking for makes sense so that, again, we can make the evaluation as objective as possible. And so a contractor can then know how to structure their proposal. Like, okay, they want me to really like hone in on these items. They're asking for these specific documents, this supporting data, this type of stuff. So it just really guides them. And so that's part of what we do is really just, tie it all together once we get the meat and bones of the technical stuff.
Nice. Um, there's a rumor that's been going around forever in this business that if you were to submit a protest, that you would sour the contracting officer as everybody else involved on the actual company that submitted it. Thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
I mean, I can't speak on how maybe other contracting officers might view those situations. I know whenever I've encountered a protest for some solicitation that's under my purview, I'm usually interested. I'm more interested to like
why?
know
What's going on?
what the why. I want to know the why, and then once I understand the why, I'll think in my mind like, is this something that is legitimate? Is it justifiable? Is there some legal credence to this? And look, if it really does fall on us, or it's easier just to do some type of corrective action to just scrap it and move on, then 9 times out of 10, I will gladly go that route rather than dragging it out and just making it a headache for everyone, making it more expensive for this company to have to pay legal fees to deal with it. And
Yeah.
other companies competing, waiting around. And we just want to get to an award in the best way possible. So I'll usually just consider the topic itself. And then sometimes it's like educational for me because I will find it very fascinating. Like, wow, that's a pretty intelligent legal point that this company is making. And I didn't really view it that way. Now I can put that in my back pocket and consider it for the next time around. But usually, if you look at like protest statistics, about half of them go through corrective action. So they don't even get to the point of having to go through like a full resolution process. And agencies are willing to work with that and not drag it out. And I think that's usually beneficial for everyone if it really addresses the issue. Now, with that being said, corrective action doesn't guarantee that this protester is going to win. All that means is we're just correcting whatever seemed to have been the issue, maybe opening up the solicitation again and recompeting it just in a more, you know, viable way for industry to be okay with it. And so that's really all that means. But that's usually how I view it. I don't hold any grudges. No.
Yeah, no, perfect. I love the explanation on it too about the corrective action side of it. Again, people don't always know what's going on that. So talk to me for a minute about RFIs. We'll hit this question next.
Yeah.
So what do you do with RFIs was the question that was asked, and I
Okay.
think so RFIs you can probably lump in sources
Yeah.
sought, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I'll add some context to it because I have seen in the last year or two a lot of times where an RFI will go out or a sources sought will go out, people will respond, and then it goes dark for a year and a half. And then I've actually seen clients be awarded 2, 3, 4 contracts on the same day based on an RFI response, yet it is not for the thing in the RFI. So it begs the question for some folks. It's like, what's going on with the RFIs and sources sought?
Yeah.
That's probably the question. Like, what's going on with those? And
Yeah.
just to give people again some context for when you
Yeah.
put that out, like what's going on.
Yeah. So I mean, any RFI or market survey or sources sought response that that we get, we save it with any file that we have, any procurement file. And usually the goal for that is one of two things, to either see who out there is capable of potentially meeting this requirement and what are the sizes of these businesses, because that can dictate if we do a small business set aside. I mean, if we have multiple small businesses, we get their capabilities, we understand their capacity to perform on this particular type of project, and we're like, okay, there's a reasonable expectation that 2 or more small businesses will be able to propose. We should probably do a set aside here. The other side of what RFIs can do are to try and understand the requirement that we want to create. And sometimes the government doesn't necessarily know how they want to put together this requirement. There's things they know they need, but they don't really know how to like tie it all together. And so asking private industry for their input is pretty valuable. And those are really key circumstances in which private industry could help shape a requirement, because now you're kind of dictating things a little bit there of, well, this is probably how you should approach it or consider it. And this is why, and these are the capabilities we have that could do it this way, and, consider it. So that may then result in maybe they received like a sole source award because they were the only company that submitted a viable path to giving us what we need, and we just decided to justify that being a sole source and award them something. Maybe it was, in some cases, there's an unsolicited proposal option that agencies can consider. Usually that occurs in research and development agencies. But companies can submit proposals, technically speaking, that are unsolicited, and they can technically be considered for an award. It's like a real caveat in the regulations, and it's lesser known and it's lesser used, to be honest with you. But that can result in some of the situations where, like, wow, this company just seemed to get this out of nowhere, and how did that happen? So I think a lot of times industry, though, is like, I submit all these RFI responses, I hear nothing back. Well, what the hell would happen? Like, what?
Yeah.
So I'm just wasting time doing this. And I agree with that train of thought, because I think a lot of times agencies don't do enough in addition to that. Like, they'll sit back, they'll put this survey out, and they're like, you know what? We're the biggest customer in the world. People will come to us. There's a big enough industry out there. Let's see what they got. To me, that's a bad way of approaching business. And some agencies do it better than others. They'll hold like my agency I worked at, BARDA, they hold tech watches where they'll give companies like a solid 30 minutes of time to sit in front of program managers, talk about their capabilities or technologies, the products they're developing, how they operate, those type of things, just to feed into this market research effort. Maybe if the RFI, to encourage folks to submit responses to RFIs, you guarantee that, or like maybe not guarantee, but say, it's very likely we'll offer you, a half hour of time in addition to this for responding, to just talk about your capabilities and get a better understanding of your business. Like, I think that would be a better way of encouraging industry to find it more useful.
Yeah, 'cause I do see a lot of people that are saying, well, we're not responding. We'll wait for the RFP. And then no RFP comes out because no one responds. So that is kind of a follow-up question to this is, so what happens when nobody responds to an RFI or RFP? Do you just can it and move on? Do you retry later and change it around? Like, what typically happens in your world when no one responds?
So for the two reasons that I mentioned before of why an RFI would be useful, if we got no responses and the reason we actually put this out there was to see if there was a small business industry capable of meeting it and no one responded, probably going to do full and open competition. So there could be small businesses that just really are going to miss out on having that potential opportunity of a set aside. For the other option of the government trying to figure out how to structure a requirement, in those circumstances, the requirement and solicitation that eventually might come out might not be very good. And it might be really hard to propose against it. Maybe the government will just hire some type of technical advisor to then help them try to draft it and build it later on down the road. That certainly can happen if they don't feel like they have the personnel to put it together. So yeah, one of those two things could occur.
Yeah. So it's likely not going away. It's just a matter of how it resurfaces is really the
question. I mean, if there's a strong need for the agency to want to get this done, it's not going to go away.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, what is your advice for contractors who respond and it is taking a while to hear something? Like, how should they be following up with you, for example, on something like
Yeah.
that?
So, I talked about how like a evaluation process goes a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's assume we're in a situation where we have multiple proposals. In some cases, you can get a dozen or so proposals, depending on the requirement. I mean, even if there's just 4 or 5, if it's a really complex requirement we're asking for, I mean, that takes a lot of time to get those panels together, and really come to a consensus on who we want to move forward with. And then you have to go through negotiations and then all those other things to even consider getting to an award. It takes time. And this like cone of silence that occurs after you submit your proposal, it really isn't the government just trying to keep everyone at arm's reach. It's just, we're just trying to get through this evaluation, because this is also just one procurement out of dozens that the agency has. So like, this isn't the only one we're doing. For a small business, this might be like their bread and butter that they're really looking forward to. So I understand why they prioritize it like that. But this is one of many for most agencies. And so you have to understand that. And the best way to check in is really just like, I would say just to ask, like, just checking in. I assume proposals are still under evaluation. Can you just confirm that's the case? And if that's the case, that's the case. And there's really not any more you need to know at that point.
Right.
And that's it. Like, just, and if it gives you some peace of mind, then it's all good. And then if you want to, you could maybe say, is there any expectation of when like evaluations might be done? And that's maybe I mean, that's all you can ask for. So
Yeah. No, good advice. And I mean, there's, you know how salespeople are. There's like 50 different tricks for questions and ways and things.
yeah.
So it's good to just hear or reassure that just being direct and simple. I mean, those are
Yeah.
two very simple questions that people can ask. So
Yep.
once a contract is awarded, how much are you typically interacting with the winners there? And I know it probably varies based on the type of
Mm-hmm.
contract, but that is one of the questions that people ask. So.
For a contract officer, once it's awarded, we'll typically have a kickoff meeting for every new award, most all of them. And generally speaking, the contract officer is going to be part of that kickoff meeting, because they can talk through the way the specific contract is structured, the roles and responsibilities of a contract officer versus a contract officer's representative who handles more of the technical stuff, how like certain administrative functions work, how like the invoicing process works, just to really make sure that they're just educated on the basics of how government contracting functions. And then from there, it just depends. I mean, if it's a situation in which we have a lot of deliverables and that have to be evaluated and looked at to make sure they meet certain success criteria established in the contract, then maybe there's a little bit more involvement. If it's one of those things that kind of operates on autopilot, you don't necessarily have to check in all the time, or there's not as many deliverables as frequently, then there's a lot like less communication. But obviously, when there's issues that may arise, whether it's performance issues, whether it's invoicing issues, whether there's a claim or something that occurs, whether there's a disruption to the work site, there's a million and one things that could happen. That's certainly when a contract officer will try to understand the gravity of it and try to get it resolved as quickly as possible, whether it's modifying the contract or resolving a claim or try and just come to some mutual agreement. I mean, ultimately, that's the goal, is just to come to some mutual agreement on how can we move forward past this in the best way possible.
Yeah, no, great answer there. So what happens, this is one of the submitted questions here. What happens if the best offer, so price-wise and everything, has a low CPAR rating?
If the best offer has a low CPAR rating, it just depends in the solicitation if the past performance was a highly weighted factor in the evaluation. So it just depends. I mean, some solicitations, they'll have like technical factors, price, and past performance. In some cases, they're equally weighted. In some cases, the technical stuff's, it'll lay it out there like this is worth weighted more than this. And many times, past performance isn't the like equally weighted or the most weighted factor. Usually, it tends to be the lowest weighted factor. So even if a company had the best proposal possible and maybe they were the lowest priced offer. If they had crappy past performance, it could potentially end up swaying the decision and the evaluation because of that component to it. But not always is the
Not
case. It
always.
just depends on how heavily weighted it is in the solicitation.
Yeah.
It should make it pretty clear whether it's a
Yeah.
point scale system, whether it's a adjectival rating system, whatever it may be.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point you bring up for a lot of people of just understanding how they're being rated. I think most
Correct.
people look at it, and even though it's there, I think
Yeah.
because people are so focused on the writing of the proposal, they don't look at, well, this is how you're being evaluated.
Right.
So you need to be paying attention to how you're being evaluated so you can focus on those areas that are important to this particular contract. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of like contracts and things, like how many of those are you juggling as an example at any given time? So you've got your pre-acquisition stuff, your RFIs and sources
Mm-hmm.
sought, and then you've got your RFQs and RFPs. Like, are you juggling 20 of these at a time, 5 of these at a time? Like, what's the average person juggling?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size of the agency, the types of projects they do. Like some agencies do these mega weapon systems contracts that take years, and there's only a couple of those, or versus another just typical agency that has a lot of like support services, a lot of like IT purchases, a lot of other stuff. So as of right now, with the District Department of Transportation, we have a couple like large scale construction infrastructure projects that are ongoing. But on any given week, I mean, there's probably at least a dozen different procurements occurring simultaneously, and that's whether it's like pre-solicitation or pre-award phase, or it's an evaluation, and then you also have the post-award stuff. So existing contracts, I mean, there's dozens of those. And so there's also just all those administrative things you're dealing with post award on those existing contracts. So it all kind of gets meshed together. So it's hard to say, with certainty, but at any given time, there could be dozens of
Dozens.
procurements, whether it's pre or post award, where you're just dealing with stuff. So
That's
you
a
got to
lot.
be able, yeah, you got to be able to like pivot from one conversation on this to another conversation
Yeah.
here. Is this like a solicitation question? Is this a post award issue? Like it's a lot
What's
of
going on
pivoting.
here? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
what's it brings me to a question I like to ask every contracting officer I talk to is, on average, how many emails do you get a day?
Um, I usually, I surprisingly don't get too many from private industry. I also don't put my email out there very much on purpose, but I don't get
Yeah.
that many, to be honest with you. I think most people honestly just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I get a lot of, messages on there, but
Wow.
given like all the program divisions we work with, my staff that I manage, all the senior leadership personnel I interact with on a daily basis, and private industry and other agencies that we correspond with, I would say on any given day, at least 100 emails
Yeah.
probably
That's a
is
lot.
what I go through. And not all of them are things I need to respond to. Many of them I just need to
Yeah.
be aware of what's going on. But
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
It's hard to get through 100 emails in a
It's a
day.
lot. It's a lot.
That's a lot of emails. One of my friends holds the record that I know of I said, how many are in your inbox right now? Because he like pulled something up and I saw the little thing and I was like, go back to that, and it was like 96,000 unread messages. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
so I have a little more like OCD in me. Like
Yeah.
I'm very big on the zero inbox kind of
Yeah,
approach, and
I'm a zero inbox too.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of my preference for it there.
yeah.
Um, so a couple more questions. We're almost done to the 20 here. So what percentage, or not an exact number here, but for the most part, what percentage of opportunities that you have that go into SAM versus don't because they are on, say, a contract vehicle or something along those lines?
Ooh, that one's tough. And again, like not all agencies are created equal.
Right.
Some of them do truly use like the GSA schedule a lot. depending on what they're buying. Some of them have government-wide IDIQ contracts that they use a lot, multiple award IDIQ contracts that they use, or maybe just internal to the agency that they use. So it really just depends. For the District Department of Transportation, we have a mixed bag. During my federal experience, it was a mixed bag, but the percentage that actually go on SAM that are competed like full and open competition, I would say probably the majority. I mean, it's the majority. Definitely the majority. That's probably where I would leave it. Is for most agencies, the majority are going to be done on SAM. The ones that aren't, again, there's some IDIQ contract they can use, the GSA schedule they can use. Maybe it's a sole source contract, but even then, with a sole source contract, you have to publicize a DNF or determination of findings that justifies why. So private industry still has the ability to view that and dispute that if they want. So yeah, I would say the majority.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
So speaking of like sole source, I know that's a hot topic for a lot of folks. What factors typically lead a contracting officer down that path to say, hey, we're going to sole source this thing?
Yeah. It really, I mean, and this is spelled out pretty clearly in the federal acquisition regulations. And it says if there's like a brand name component to it, like this is the only brand that produces this spare part or whatever it may be, that is the brand that is required for this product, then clearly the only one that can provide it. But I mean, ultimately it just comes down to, is this the only company that's truly capable of performing this requirement, whether it's providing a good or a service? And there's different ways you can justify that. The regulations, in very like rare circumstances, if it's like an unusual and compelling emergency or some declared emergency, national emergency, okay, that's pretty reasonable. I think we all agree on that. Mm-hmm. But those are, rare circumstances. But ultimately, if you can justify that company is the only one that can do this, then that's what it comes down to. But again, it's all publicized. And so industry can review that and they can dispute it if they feel like they can do it.
Yeah, no, good answer. So last question for you. It's kind of a flavor of a previous question there, but let's say I'm trying to reach you and I've been at it for a couple of months now and I'm just not getting a response. What are your suggestions?
Well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to reach me for. So
that's a good
that would be the first response is,
like,
what
are
they
ignoring
actually...
you and I may not be.
Yeah. I mean, if it's someone who's just submitting like a blanket capabilities statement to me, like a company that they occasionally do that, where they're like, hey, we're a, hub zone based company and we can do X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to respond. Like, I'm going to let you know that now. I think it's great that, you have some of these small business certifications and you can do this work, but I'm not the one that it's going to matter to. Like, you need to work with a small business liaison. Every agency has one. They have a small business office and program you can work with. And again, the program managers are the ones that have the budget to spend, and they're the ones that dictate the requirement. So those are the ones that you're going to have a lot more interest in having that communication with, of sharing your capabilities and what you're able to do. And, if that's why you're reaching out to me, probably not going to respond. But again, if you're reaching out to me to showcase interest in a specific program, like you've done your homework, like this program A, I feel like we're capable of being, a really good partner with you. Is there a program manager you can put me in touch with? Because I can't seem to figure out who it is. Then I'll probably respond to that one. If you seem legitimate, I'll be like, sure, this is someone who's eager to put their stuff in front of us. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like, I would assume if I have been looking at the forecast, if you guys have a forecast in your office, if I've been looking at the forecast and I see something and I have a question and it's a specific question about a specific thing and you're listed as the POC, that's a good time to reach out versus, again, just the generic, hey, I'm just raising my hand up so that I'm alive and I sell these things that you don't even buy. Because that happens a lot, I assume. So.
Yeah, it does. And I definitely try my best to be more of a face to our procurement team. I think a lot of folks look at contract officers and like procurement staffs, and they seem to be a little more removed and hidden from like the face of the agency, whereas I prefer to be the face where I can and really connect the dots with private industry. I do a lot of speaking engagements with private industry. I do a lot of speaking panels, roundtable events, and I really just try to educate them on how certain regulations work, how it impacts them specifically in their business, how they could potentially improve their odds of winning contracts, forecasting opportunities, things that we're considering, any unique questions they have. I try to answer them and really just, be more marketable as an agency. And I think the more marketable you are as an agency, the more people want to do business with you. Like ultimately that
Right.
should be the way that you want to do it. So, yeah.
Right. No, I think that's a perfect way to end the podcast today. I think you are so responsive, whether it's LinkedIn, email, whatever it may be. You've come on and been really gracious with your time to do the podcast and go through
Yeah.
the 20 questions, some of them
Yeah.
kind of grueling there, but providing a lot of insight for this on the back end for people. Because again, I think the confusion is there because some people don't know. There's a lot of people that have been in this market a really long time. They completely understand this, but there's a lot of new people, and
Yeah.
it's just a good service to be able to help them, navigate all this stuff. So thank you for
Absolutely.
coming on and talking about it. I really appreciate it, Jordan.
Yeah, absolutely.